Hello and welcome back. We are the M3 Collective. My name is Edwin, and of course, with me is Anjanette and Simon. We're here to discuss the book Positive Intelligence. Why only 20% of teams and individuals achieve their true potential and how you can achieve yours. Now, before we kind of get going here, the author's name, I have trouble saying it. Anjanette or Simon, can you help? Shirzad Chamine, am I pronouncing it correctly?
Shirzad, Chamine,
Chamine.
or Chamine, and we apologize to the author if that is mispronounced, but Shirzad, Chamine is
Hmm.
what I would, how I
Yeah.
would pronounce it.
And positive intelligence. Yes. And so we're here to sort of discuss the book, Positive Intelligence, and how it applies to your life. And so we've all kind of gone on this journey over the past few weeks of deep diving the book, Positive Intelligence. And so to sort of kick off this conversation, we would like to sort of start with the definition, or what is positive intelligence, and then what role does it play in your life? I'd like to start with you, ladies first. I'd like to start with you, Anjanette. So, yeah, for what is positive intelligence and what role does it play in your life?
So I'm going to paraphrase what positive intelligence is versus giving like the line by line definition of how the book describes it. This is sort
Hmm.
of how I interpret it. And it will lead into my takeaways of the book. If you've ever seen the memes where you have when you're faced with a decision, that you see the angel on one shoulder and you see the devil on the other. And those are both part of you. Like both the angelic and the devil side is both part of who you are. And given any circumstance, any decision, we have the choice. We have the choice, but we hear, each side kind of, murmuring things to us. Shazatra means calls the angel our sage self. That is our deep wisdom. And it's without stress or distress or fear, or frustration or anger. But it is that sort of connection to everything that is wise about us. It's rooted in our values. If you are spiritual, it's connected to a greater sense of self. And then you have that devil side. And the devil side is what he calls the sage. He doesn't use the term devil or angel, but I'm just paraphrasing in terms of how I've read the book and how it has been meaningful to me. And so he calls the devil side the saboteurs, and that's your judge. He calls the overachiever, the controller, the restless. And it usually leads you onto a path of anger, stress, frustration, anxiety. And we have both of those within us. The PQ, positive intelligence, is having the awareness that you do have that choice at any given moment and to choose the sage or the angel meme side. And that leads to greater happiness. And greater happiness, he says, is spending more time in our sage perspective than our saboteur perspective. And so positive intelligence is the awareness of that choice and having the ability to sort of control the way we feel, thoughts, and action to be more aligned with the sage.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Yeah, it's a great definition. Simon,
Yeah, I think,
for you, yeah. Hmm.
yeah, Anjanette, I think you kind of cover, you know, all the important
Hmm.
points. For me, I'm just going to stick with something, simple and, mathematical, I guess. Well, because
Hmm.
it is kind of, according to the book, it's a percentage, right? PQ is a percentage from 0 to 100%. And basically, just like what you said, Anjanette, is the amount of time that we spend, or percentage of the time that we spend on the sage side of things rather than on the saboteur side of things, right? And so if you are more aware, you have a higher PQ. That means you're more aware of yourself and able to do certain things that are more in the realm of one of the five powers that sage can give us. So yeah, it's just a number for me from 0 to 100, and we want to be as close to 100 as possible. although
Yeah.
the book says it's impossible to achieve 100%. So,
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a really good point. And so, yeah, so, positive intelligence is of course, when you look at the quotient, or as Simon mentioned, the percentage of time, it's or when you look at it, it's like the percentage of time your mind is serving you rather than sabotaging you. So it's like the percentage of time in which your mind is serving you versus sabotaging you. And of course, positive intelligence measures the strength of when your mind is your best friend, and to Anjanette's point, but also your worst enemy. So that's the angel and the devil on both sides of you, as depicted in many cartoons and depicted in many films over history. Now, when you look at positive intelligence and you look at it in general, it's an indication of the control that you have over your own mind and how well your mind acts in your best interest. So just to kind of just take this one step further, when your mind isn't acting in your best interest, it's telling you that you can't do something, or it's telling you that you don't have the ability to do something, or it's putting a mental block on your own capabilities. And so the goal of positive intelligence is to take that block off of your mind so that you can have more experiences and do more things in life, and conquer your challenges, and just to kind of give a little bit more statistics, uh, project teams with higher PQ perform 31% better on average when other factors are held equally. So positive intelligence, to Anjanette and Simon's point, by having a knowledge of your PQ and having a knowledge of positive intelligence, it results in greater happiness and performance and leads to better and greater success. So that's what positive intelligence is in your life. Simon, Anjanette, anything to add before we move on?
nope, I think we did a,
No, that's great. I think
yeah, I
it's
think we covered all
comprehensive.
the
Three
key
different
things.
perspectives.
Yeah, three different perspectives. So let's kind of shift gears a little bit, and let's talk about work and career and challenges. And so to give our audience some tools for their toolkit, how to handle a toxic boss without losing your mind. What are some various PQ strategies one can employ in order to handle sort of a toxic work situation or a toxic boss? Simon, why don't you take this one first?
Yeah, so I'm not sure how what's the percentage of people will run into one of these. I definitely have run into not that many. I would say there's only one in my career that is really or truly difficult to obviously that happened many years ago before I had a chance to read this book. So I may not have handled it the best possible way. I did feel really angry, frustrated, especially I was putting in all I have in getting my job done and so on. It just was not a good how the boss, or he's the founder and CEO, so it's kind of, you can't get any higher than that. So there's nobody else to I can complain to, right? So it's pretty much, I have to either find ways to deal with it, or I have to leave. So at the end, I left. But looking back, perhaps that is a better way to deal with this, right? Now that I know of the five, I guess, powers of Sage can give us, probably would have started with empathy, which I think a lot of the situations that we're going to be discussing should probably start with empathy. If you talk about all five powers, empathy probably is my weakest, and I still have a lot to sort of work on it. But yeah, starting with empathy, able to understand why the boss is behaving in that manner. Maybe there's something else behind that, and then the rest of the I guess the Sage framework can be applied as well. Things like, exploration, innovation, navigation, and then activates. Those can come, but I think able to start with empathy, to understand the situation better, work with the person to explore what else can we do? How can we resolve the situation in a better way? Yeah, that's what I would have done if I
Hmm.
know what I knew today.
Absolutely. Yeah, love that. Anjanette, what are your strategies to deal with the toxic boss without losing your mind?
And I think this could apply to anyone who we deem as being like toxic in the work
Hmm.
environment. And that would be like the person, if we go back to the devil side of things, are exemplifying more of those characteristics than the angel or sage side. And so I think that first off is to really understand what's happening. And I think that this book has really, really helps the discernment process of what is happening when you are facing someone who is toxic is that to take a look at what's happening. So Shirzad Chamine gives you a list of saboteurs, that would be the devil side characteristics, the judge, the stickler, the restless, the controller. And I find it really helpful to then start to figure out, who is this person, like sort of what is happening here. Is it judgment, or is it controller, hyper vigilant? It could be a stickler personality if it's toxicity. And I think also what this book helps with is that these saboteurs are usually developed in childhood as a way to protect the psyche emotionally or even physically, that certain characteristics develop in order to allow a young child to survive. And he really goes back into the science of things too. So that sort of disconnects the toxicity from the person themselves. You begin to have like a better understanding of what's happening. And so also what this book has really helped with is that this person's saboteurs can trigger your saboteurs. So it's relational. It's not just toxicity, is how you are responding and reacting to toxicity. So someone who might be a controller, saboteur, or very judgmental could activate like the pleaser in you so that you overcompensate and capitulate to this person, but end up resentful later. Or it could activate like your controller, and so that you start getting really upset and stressed and tense. And what I really liked about this book is that he showed that this becomes a vortex, that the negative energy between now you and the toxic boss, the swirl of negative energy kind of keeps you both within that. And you can begin to see the ongoing distress, anxiety. But what this book also does is help you get outside of that, because there has to be someone who kind of reaches outside the vortex, so there's an opportunity to stop this cyclone of negative energy. So yes, he gives you the techniques. And so what he says, and what really works for me, is to take this breath, like just to like create a little bit of space. If this boss is coming down in this sort of judgy controller way, and then you can feel your own saboteurs arise, like how dare he, or I'm going to just quit, or something, that you can just stop yourself. You get that awareness as you do the PQ reps and you do the practices, you become much better. Like going to the gym, this is sort of like mental fitness. You're like, I get it. This is his judge showing up, and my judge is showing up. And so I'm just going to take a breath. I'm going to feel my feet on the ground. I'm going to, like feel the computer keys beneath my fingers. And that stops automatically providing oxygen to your saboteurs. And so now you're able to, in that space, switch from like that devil side, the saboteur side, to the sage side. So what I found very helpful with this book is it gives you the tools to do that. And then you get better and better and better at it, so that you don't feel the stress, distress, anxiety, frustration when you're working in that toxic environment. So then you can make a decision based on sage discernment. Should I be in this environment? But you make the decision without being in like anger or frustration or anxiety, but with a calm mind, consider what are my options here? Do I need to stay in this job? And if I do, then how do I manage this from a sage perspective? He talks about this three gifts
Mhm.
technique. And the situation, no matter what it is, doesn't have to be like a good situation, but positive intelligence teaches you that every situation can be a gift or opportunity. And I know that's a really hard pill to swallow because when you're in it, it feels like the worst thing ever. But can you give yourself some time to say, for me, if I'm dealing with a toxic person, it gives me the opportunity to practice PQ. Like this is a challenging moment where I can, in the face of adversity, practice positive intelligence and put in my reps. He calls them like my reps. This is my opportunity to work out.
Mhm.
And also, it is like this sort of, he calls it the, and help me here, he calls it, what is it, the anthropologist? He
Mhm.
calls that the exploring. It become curious, become like an FBI profiler. And that helps diminish any anxiety or fear or whatever. You become like, oh, this is curious. Like, what are you doing? Like, do you have, you don't ask these questions, but you think to yourself, what type of childhood does this person have? What are they doing? What do you think that they think that they're getting out of? Or, isn't there stress and frustration? Isn't that interesting? Like how is that mechanism working? And yeah, so I will stop there.
No.
But those are some of the tools in the book that I think could help when you're faced with a situation like that.
Yeah. Love that. No, that was very, very in-depth on Jeanette and Simon. Just, great tools for our listeners on how to deal with the toxic boss without losing your mind. I'll just add just a little bit to this, right? And I think for me, it is like, how do you feel during your interactions with that person? And you touched on this a little bit on Jeanette when you spoke about the anxiety, but then also, are you feeling anxiety? Are you feeling disappointment, frustration, shame, blame, and guilt? And if you think about it, those are the judge's favorite feelings, right? So when someone is judging you, you're generally going to feel those ways. And if that's your interaction with the person and that's sort of your takeaway with dealing with that particular boss, then maybe you might have to examine your relationship with your boss and say, is this the best working situation for me? Because for a lot of people, you get your best performance when you're allowed to take risks, when you're allowed to take a chance. And if you're feeling those feelings, anxiety, disappointment, frustration, blame, and shame and guilt, then are you going to really be at your best? Are you going to really be able to show up every day as your best self when you're in that type of a work environment? And then I would say that my last point here is, does your manager, does your boss, or the people that you work with, are you in an empathetic situation where if you do make a mistake, people have compassion for you, right? Because we are all human beings and we all make mistakes. But were you trying to do the right thing for the business and were you trying to do the right thing for the team? You know, when you make a mistake, do people try to beat you up? Because if that happens, you then become much more defensive and you're much less likely to explore the mistakes that you made and where you went wrong so that you can come to a better outcome in the future. So for me, it's being in a work environment or working and dealing with leadership and management where there is less toxicity or less saboteur behavior and more empathetic behavior, more sage behavior. And if you find yourself in a work environment where, the saboteurs and the judges are true, then, you can label it, you can try to work through it as best you can. But overwhelmingly, if the situation is just too toxic, then maybe those are the types of situations that you have to walk away from and you have to try to figure out something else because not everyone is like that. But knowing these negative behaviors and what to look for can help you make better decisions in the future.
Yeah, I love that, Edwin. If I can just like add to that, it also allows you to stand up for yourself
Hmm.
in
Hmm.
sage mode in a way, because when we tend to react, which would be like out of anger or from any of the saboteur perspectives or anxiety, we're probably not going to have like an optimal representation of ourselves. So if we can stand up and say, you know what, I'm not going to take this. I'm going to, to form boundaries around the situation and to create meaningful change has to be done from a sage perspective. So that means that we're not coming back in anger. We're not coming back as a victim. Because here's the thing, too, with your responding or reacting to toxicity in the work environment, it teaches a lot about who you are to yourself. Like I've thought this, like, what type of responses are activated in me when I'm faced with Toxicity. Is it the victim? Like, do I tend to just cower? And so that's teaching me something about me. It's an opportunity for me to sort of learn from that. And then how do I respond from that? Right? If I can then move and quiet the victim, that will allow me to stand up for myself and say, no, this is not right. I don't deserve this treatment, and to create some meaningful change within that. But you have to do that from this book's perspective, which I agree with, from a sage point of view versus judgment versus overachieving versus trying to control the situation. And if you can't mediate that and you can't bring out the sage perspective from the toxic person, then what are your options? Like, is it going to HR? Is it leaving the job? But as well, to see those options, you have to be in sage perspective than saboteur perspective, which Shirzad Chamine says is very tunnel vision. It will just focus on the negative reaction, like the negative emotion that toxic person is causing you. So that could be sadness, overwhelm, fear. And in that mode, you cannot see any of the other options. You have to be in that state of calm. And like I said from our beginning of our conversation, that's a hard pill to swallow. That's tough. That's not so easy. Like, oh, just switch to sage perspective. But we'll get more into some of the techniques later in this discussion. And it does take time.
Absolutely. But let's shift gears a little bit here. During COVID, pretty much everyone that had to go to the office every day was working remotely. Some people have, of course, gone back to work. Some companies have taken the position of being a remote only a company or a remote company with some sort of hybrid activities. I know that some of us worked on some techniques during COVID in order to protect ourselves from remote work burnout. But what are some PQ hacks to stay focused and energized while working from home? Simon, what are your thoughts on this? What are some positive intelligence techniques to stay focused and energized?
Yeah, I have to say I actually prefer working from home. But yeah, there's some of the techniques that I have done is I just take breaks
Hmm.
because we tend to work longer if we're working from home. Even before COVID, sometimes I do work from home, and I realize that, right? You don't have to commute, so you kind of sit in your home office much longer, and you sometimes you just keep on going. And in order to sort of help, you just get up and just like when you're in the office, you do get up and go get coffee and talk to somebody in the hallways and so on. So you just have to do the same thing. Just get up, you know, get your coffee from the kitchen. And I think sometimes there will be distractions, especially during COVID times when all the kids are at home, and you just have to set that boundary with them to say, I'm working, maybe close the door if you have one, and just have to accept that there will be certain distractions there. Again, I'm going to start with the empathy again, right? Because if there was distraction, you need to understand why they are coming to you, right? Sage perspective is can be from ourselves and also from the other party as well, right? So just be empathizing with yourself and also with your family and or whoever's around you, and then work with them to find ways to make this thing work out better. And that will obviously cause less stress on yourself. So why are they, why are they like this? Why are they bothering me? I'm
Mhm.
working. Yeah, I think it's just little things. As mentioned previously, is the PQ reps, right? That exercise, the training that we need to do to allow us to handle the situations a little bit quicker, a little bit better each time.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I like that. Jeanette, what are some techniques you use while working remotely to prevent burnout and to stay focused and energized?
So I think I'm going to go through a couple of the saboteur personality traits and a couple of the sage personality traits I think are important when you are working remotely. Because when you work remotely, you're not necessarily in the best optimal environment for like being able to be disciplined and focused. There's a lot of distractions. There's not as many accountability checks in the home environment as there is, when you're working among others in an office environment. And I'll read out a couple of things, so just please bear with me. So, a couple of the saboteurs that might show up when you are working remotely. First would be the avoider. So, the avoider focuses on the positive and pleasant in an extreme way. It avoids difficult and unpleasant tasks and conflicts, and it leads to habits of procrastination and conflict avoidance. It could be a little bit or a lot easier within your home environment or remote environment to procrastinate or be distracted, and a lot easier to avoid conflict. I mean, when you're in a Zoom call, you can just sort of mute yourself or leave the meeting at the end of it. But and we just talked about a toxic boss, that's compartmentalized within a small little frame on your computer that you can exit and enter into for very short periods versus being with that toxic person for 8 hours, right? So those are the type of how do you now deal with these? How do you counter distraction, avoiding? Also, the restless personality trait, which is constantly in the search of greater excitement in the next activity or through perpetual busyness, kind of avoids other things that are important. That also shows up, I think, in the remote when you're working remotely. And now switching to the sage. So I think what PQ does and PQ reps do is that it allows you to stay in a sage perspective where you are able to navigate and choose a path that best aligns with a deeper underlying value and mission, right? Who you are as a great worker, fulfilling your tasks that you have to do throughout the day without any stress, without any frustration or anxiety, and to activate your activate sage muscle, which takes decisive action without distress, interference, or distractions from the saboteurs. So I think these two sage personalities, I think, are perspectives. If you can practice these and remind yourself that to come back to this is very helpful in a remote setting.
Oh, very good. Nice. Yeah, I like what both you and Simon said here on, activating your sage and, um, you know, reducing the power of your saboteurs. I think that what's important in a remote setting is to separate your space. Try to separate your living space from your workspace so that you can have clear boundaries on when it's time for work and then when it's time to not work. So I think if you're able to have an office or to have a nook or just a section of your home or your place of residence to where hey, this is where I work and then this is when I don't work. And so I think separation of space is important. To Simon's point, breaking up your day, having coffee breaks, having tea breaks are just extremely important. But also from time to time, especially as the weather becomes better, feel free to take walks, to take a 30-minute walk, take a 20-minute walk, as your schedule permits, don't be afraid to get out of the office or get out of your house and just walk around your community or your neighborhood, just to kind of, just get some fresh air. And that in itself, going outside, taking a deep breath, that activates your sage. So, but then also at the end of the day, we're still human beings, and there is a need to have a connection. And so while you might not necessarily be in the office every day, feel free to still connect with your coworkers. If and when it's possible, go to lunch, have a dinner, with friends or coworkers, or don't be afraid to have a happy hour so that you can stay connected to your coworkers or to your friends, so that you're just not isolated all day, right? By yourself. Because ultimately, I don't really think that we as humans really perform well when we're not connected with others. We seek connection. I think that we're designed to seek connection. So don't be afraid to, even though you're working from home or you're working remotely, make a conscious effort to connect with others. It'll be very good it'll be very good for your own activation of your sage, but then also it will keep your saboteurs at bay. And so, yeah, that's my general thought as relates to that.
That's a great point too, Edwin, and I forgot about that. You're talking about the vortex. I think, I discussed the vortex of negativity, but there's also the vortex of the sage vortex, which is inspiration and positivity and excitement and awe and wonder. And I think that's sometimes what's missing if you're not in a work environment and you're working remotely. I mean, you can have a Zoom meeting, you can have a remote meeting, but there's something about being in the same room with other people and sandboxing and exploring and innovating that we do have. And the book describes our mirror neurons, that we will, our like neurochemistry will, it does react to others around us and to their neurochemistry. So if everyone is in this positive, uplifting, excited, passionate, exploring, innovating, sandboxing mode, and to be within that physically, that our sage perspective comes out, and then we too mirror what is happening, and there's something alchemical that happens. And I'm sure both of you have been in this situation too, where it's just the milieu, the environment that you're in, that you get excited. You come away from it feeling very positive and ready to go, and you'll work more efficiently because you are now grounded in the shared value and the shared passion and the shared mission of whatever project is going on. And so I would encourage folks, if they are working 100% remotely, to try to take that time every once in a while to be part of team meetings, to be part of that excitement, because I do think that that is a downside and a bit sad. I would miss that if I didn't have that.
Let's shift gears a little bit, and let's focus a little bit on relationships and social dynamics. And so let's just speak about, arguments with your partner. How can PQ sort of fix that, right? How can PQ kind of fix when, arguments that you have with your significant other or even a business partner or whatever? What are some techniques that we can do in order to try to fix those situations? Simon, why don't you take this one, please?
Yeah, I think, like I said previously, the again we're starting with empathy, right? And
Hmm.
I find that empathy is so useful, and yet I'm not the best at this, so lots to learn still. But if you're talking about there's another thing from the book that I picked out, which is really good, is it calls it the PQ channel. There's the data channel, and then there's the PQ channel. So what does that mean? So data channel are basically the message, the information that I'm trying to tell somebody. But there's also this PQ channel that I should be connected to that person. Every one of us have this PQ channel that are sending off this PQ, information, which might get missed, right? Because if you just focus more on the data itself, may not be enough. So if you get into an argument, maybe we're only focusing on the facts, on the data itself. But what are the PQ side of things that's happening with ourselves, with the partner? So In terms of how will I sort of handle this is, again, start with empathy, connect with that person's Pico channel, right? And then explore. Maybe there's some other stuff that could be done. And the other ones will come as well, right? Innovate, find different solutions, and then navigate. Maybe discuss with your partner. How else can we handle this one? Can we do this better? And then, of course, I think the last one is also very important. It's called activate, right? Sometimes we just talk, but we don't take action. And guess what? Things happen again, soon enough, and we get back into this same argument again. Did we not just talk about this? Why did nothing happen? Well, because we did not take action on this thing, right? Some you may call me a little too rational or hyper rational at times, but I guess it depends how we look at the situation, right? The book sort of talks about this framework. I find it really useful. I like structure. Maybe some of the listeners might feel that way as well. Sometimes a little bit of structure kind of helps me kind of put things into perspective a little bit easier. At the end of the day, this PQ is another tool in our tool sets that we can bring out and use when we get into certain situations. So I think, and I think that's what M3 Collectives is about, right? Touch on all these different tools and enrich our tool sets so that we can deal with all kinds of situations that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, Anjanette, how about yourself?
Yeah, so this was an interesting part of the book, which was kind of revolutionary to me, but it totally makes sense. But just seeing it in written form, I thought was very impactful for me. So, he says that conflict lives at the position level, and they're usually opposite. Like, I think this way, or I want this, and then someone else is like, well, I want this, or you're not hearing me, and the other person was like, you're not hearing me. And they're like these two very sort of opposite or certainly not unified positions. And what was for me revolutionary is that conflict is rarely or never resolved at this position level. Like, this is what I want, this is what I want, or you're doing this to me, or whatever the conflict is. So what he says, I'm going to read, this is Shirzad Chamine, Positive Intelligence. He says, well, at the position level, one party or the other needs to give up its own position entirely, or the two need to meet somewhere in between, which would result in each feeling like they have been compromised. And so neither is the optimal way to resolve conflict on major issues. And so I too thought, well, could we meet in the middle? Or, do I go over to this person's side, or does this person go over to that person's side? And so what is also interesting is that the positions are held entirely by and defended by the saboteurs, who are in their very nature never interested in resolution. They're only interested in being right. So I'm going to recap that, because to me that was kind of like an aha moment. It was like, so you're at this position level, you're in conflict with whoever it is, and your saboteurs are driving your position. They're holding on and they're defending it. And they are actually not interested in resolution to the conflict. They're just interested in being right. And seeing conflict in this way for me is a game changer. And so, the book goes into that these positions are actually being held by underlying assumptions and judgments that are often not accurate, right? And so one of the things that I think would be is a good question to ask when you're in the conflict is, what assumptions am I making here? Like, what am I assuming? And am I actually right? Is this actually warranted? And the conflict, the resolution to the conflict is actually dissolving your saboteurs, each shifting from, your saboteur perspective. So that's like your judgment, your controller, your stickler, your victim, to more of a sage perspective, which is like empathy, like Simon had talked about. It could be exploring. Like I wonder what my assumptions are and are they correct? Like, sort of, and also where you want to get to. So helping dissolve those, stop feeding, or is also a state in the book which I really like cut off the oxygen to the saboteurs, like that devil side of you. Forget which side, I think it was this side, and give more fuel and feed the angelic side of you, the sage side of you, and that's where the resolution comes from. Because you can still, at the end, disagree. You can still, at the end, not necessarily get what you want, because maybe what you want is driven by saboteurs anyway, right? And so what it does is allows you to come to a greater understanding of what's happening and acceptance, or, right, pushes you into discernment, which might mean I have to walk away from this.
Mhm.
So I think it reconfigured how I think about conflict now. It's more of a, sometimes more of a, you doing the work of, really seeing more widely than it is just getting your way.
Yeah. I think when I think about resolving conflicts, or just, when I look at that and I look at what PQ can bring to the table, I think, one of the main things that I look at is empathy, because empathy can provide um, feelings regarding appreciation for both yourself and for others. And so part of empathy is that appreciation, that compassion, and the ability to forgive, because sometimes forgiveness is what's needed more so than the judge, right? Or more so than your saboteurs, because your saboteurs are sort of that component that wants you to make the other person feel bad, or you want to punish the other person. Whereas when you employ empathy, then you're sort of looking at ways that you can sort of move forward and problem solve and try to find a solution or resolution to the problem. So I see it as you have to have empathy for your partner, um, and you don't necessarily want to use your judge and or your saboteurs, because you want to be able to sort of sit down and have that exploration that's needed in order to really sort of deeply dive into, in order to uncover a path forward. The more that you can discover, the more solutions you can devise, and then you can take actions. So the sage is kind of what you want, to be able to turn mistakes into opportunities, turn the mistakes into gifts, in part through discovery, and that happens through the explore mode and activating your sage.
Just want to add to what Angela just said about positions. As you were describing that, kind of reminded me about a negotiation class that I took, and it kind of framed the same manner where two parties have their own position and they're kind of like stuck in that kind of not conflict, but unable to make progress in whatever that situation might be. And then the course talk about how can we, obviously starting with empathy, right, be able to understand better, maybe not go be beyond the position. Why is that person asking for that? Once you understand that, sometimes you're able to find or reframe that both can come out as a winners, right? Instead of either a lose-lose or a win-lose situation, you can
Mhm.
find ways to make that into a win-win situation. Of course, that is more business based, right? And so, yeah, if you're talking with your business partner or your partner with another company, you can definitely use that. And however, it'll be much more difficult if you're using this, with your spouse. That's a completely different situation, but the idea is there, right? How can you reframe this in a way that both can walk away as the winners?
Perfect. Let's sort of shift gears again here, and let's talk about just PQ, and how can you build uh, the mental muscle, right? So how can you build sort of the mental muscle so that when your saboteurs start to sort of develop, you can build mechanisms in order to fight them off? So let's just talk about building mental muscles so that you can adequately spot and address your saboteurs. Anjanette, why don't you go first, please?
Yeah, so what I find so great about this book is that it's like entering like a mind gym, right? It's like we understand what it is to build physical muscles. Like we want to lift this much weight. Well, we can't go in and lift like, well, for me, because I'm a smaller person, like I can't go in and lift 200 pounds. I might can't do that, or even like 100 pounds. I have to build myself up. I have to start with like 5 pound weights. And I think that's the same with like challenges. And if you go through the book and you see some of the case studies, or even if you're thinking about the things that we're talking about now, dealing with a toxic boss, for instance, I think that it seems quite lofty to be able to be in Sage's perspective and like in a second and be able to deal with the situation, with not feeling any distress or feeling no anxiety and just being able to float through it. I think that to you need to build your PQ or your mental muscles to be able to take on those type of challenges. And so I really like thinking about it like that very much because it takes work. You have to go to the gym, and very much the same in building PQ. It has to be a daily practice. You have to give it some time. He suggests about 21 days and at about 100 reps a day. So 100 PQ reps a day of 10 seconds each. And so what a PQ rep is shifting your mindset. So from if you feel like anger, you feel anxiety, it would be, taking a breath or feeling your feet on the ground, or feel if you're washing your hands, feeling the water. And what that does, and feeling it for 10 seconds. So if you're washing your hands, feeling the lather of the soap, feeling the water. And so what that does is it cuts off the oxygen to your saboteur perspective. So if you're feeling angry or you're feeling anxious, taking this break, 10 seconds helps. It doesn't mean that at first it's going to completely reframe and you're not going to go back to saboteur mode, but it's a rep. It's like lifting that 5 pound weight with a goal of going to like 25 pounds or whatever it is. And so it is this developmental process. And, as well, while you're going through the process of building those muscles, watch what shows up. Does your judge show up? Like, oh, I've been doing PQ reps and nothing's happening. Like, I'm still feeling anxiety. I'm still feeling fear, still feeling anger. But bringing in empathy, going to sage perspective, even in that, that's a learning opportunity. Like, oh my gosh, here's my victim showing up again. Or, oh my gosh, here's my judge judging circumstances, judging myself again. And at that moment, to do a PQ rep. Right. Because even the awareness and labeling your saboteurs, like, there's my judge again. I'm judging this situation negatively. Like, I have no assumptions or basis that are warranted for me to believe that. So I'm going to switch and I'm going to, feel my feet on the ground. I'm going to feel my breath for 10 seconds. I'm going to like feel the breeze or feel the sunlight if you're outside or feel the wind. So yes, there's all of those opportunities to move into sage, and it takes time.
Oh man. Yeah.
Yeah, so to add to that, I think these exercises are basically to distract us from whatever emotion we're feeling at that time. And it is important, I think, because if you are in a saboteur kind of mode, it tends to be kind of narrow focus because it's very emotional kind of driven. And you just keep on going. And having a way to sort of distract yourself, you tend to get out of that mode, even for 10 seconds, can help to kind of reframe your mind a little bit, right? To say, oh, why am I feeling that way? And hopefully, once you have done that, you can then, reset by taking a walk or do whatever you need to really get out of that feeling, to another way to frame it is to reduce that saboteur influence, and then hopefully you can then switch over to sage and then handle that situation. So this is what I got. Another point I got, a good point I got from the book is that the PQ, or the positive thinking, is a way to say, we need to stay calm. We need to be able to think clearly, to make the best decision, to choose the best option. And we can't do that when we are like stuck in a particular saboteur mode, right? And so we need ways to break out from there. And the exercises is a way to help us be more easily, just like going to the gym. The stronger you are, you build the muscle, you can then lift heavy things a little bit easier, right? So yeah, the more exercise we do, we can then break out from that negative, vortex, into hopefully reset it and go into a sage mode.
I really like that. I really like that. I like what both of you all said. The most, or the critical component of this is living in the moment. Being in the moment and not rushing through life. And what does this mean? During your daily routines, are you paying attention to, like, when you're brushing your teeth, are you paying attention to the way that the brush sort of hits your teeth, right? When you take your morning shower, are you taking a moment to just breathe in the air and smell in the lather from the soap, right? When you go to the gym, are you just going to the gym just to lift weights? Or are you like really feeling the muscles going, or the weight going up and down, and your reaction to your physical reaction to the weights that's sort of taking place, right? Because all of those exercises, brushing your teeth, taking a shower, hiking, all of those things activate your PQ, activate your positive intelligence. All of those things activate your sage. When you take that walk and you're paying attention to the trees and the flowers and whatnot, you're paying attention, and you're activating your sensory observations, which activates your sage, right? Generally, when you're feeling the negative sentiments and you're responding to it, you're you know you, you're not you're allowing your saboteurs to win. And the goal is to always remain calm, to always remain poised, and to build your own capabilities so that you don't respond to negative aggression when you're receiving that from peers, from coworkers, from your spouse, from children, and a parent, and clearly, the people that are the closest to us can sometimes be the ones that do the best job of getting under our skin. But taking a moment to feel even a desk, and to feel how your hands feel when they touch the desk, really can sort of activate your senses. And when you have a full control of activating your senses, and you're able to just do that as part of a daily routine, it then becomes a habit. And then as it becomes a habit, you're then able to control your emotions, and then build a positive intelligence, because you have control over yourself in a way that very few people possess.
I love that you brought this back to happiness, because one of our first books was Atomic Habits that we read,
Hmm.
that we all recommended. And it is, and it's habit building to happiness. Really,
Hmm.
that's what, cutting off oxygen to your saboteurs, which will lead you to unhappiness. It's building the habits, and the neural connections to create a happier life, which means that happiness in this respect means that we spend more time in positive energy feelings than negative. Like, we spend more time in wonder, awe, empathy, excitement, passion than we do in fear, anger, stress, anxiety. And, one of the things too that when you were talking about, going throughout your day, Edwin, was even like driving. Being in PQ could mean not only greater happiness, but safety as well, because road rage is a thing right now as people are feeling more stress and anxiety. How many times have you not been really aware when you're driving? Or, you'll see some folks being just very like hyper vigilant and, sort of angry at what are these people doing in my lane or whatever, without really sort of experiencing that, this is like actually a really beautiful day today, or feeling their hand on the steering wheel. I mean, that's a really good sort of PQ hack too, is when you're starting to feel upset about activity on the road rather than, speeding up or doing whatever or going into rage, taking that moment to feel your hand on the steering wheel, feel the heat of the steering wheel. And that what that does is it creates that gap or a bit of space between your reaction and your response so that you just don't become more inflamed and going into that vortex of negativity that we talked about. So it could be a positive sort of safety thing as well as increasing your happiness.
As we, this has been a wonderful conversation. We're going to have two or three more questions here as we bring this conversation to a close. There's one topic here I would be remiss if we didn't cover, and especially for our listeners. And what I really want to focus on here, I want to pivot again, and I want to talk a little bit about crisis and resilience, and specifically rebuilding after failure. How does our sage turn a setback into a strength? I really just kind of just want to talk about this real quick before we move on, because with things that are going on right now, just in the world, there's just a lot of activity that's taking place in crisis and emergencies. And so, how do we rebuild after failure? How your sage turns setbacks into strengths. Simon, would you mind taking this?
Yeah, so just like what we touched on earlier, when we have a setback, it's easy to get stuck in that, right?
Hmm.
And spiral downwards, right, in the vortex. And the way to allow us to rebuild is to get out of that, right? And we already mentioned previously, to get out of that, you need to be able to break out of that saboteur mode. And so I would, again, going back to the five powers of a sage
Hmm.
perspective can give us, right?
Hmm.
Start with empathy again, right? To empathize with yourself in this situation because it's my setback, right? Let's empathize with myself and with the situation that I'm in so that I can proceed with the other four, right? To explore how can I, what are the different things that I'm, we talk about assumptions. Am I getting stuck in some assumptions? Can I, be more open about other, opportunities, other options? If we couldn't find any, well, innovate, right? It's time to think outside of the box sometimes. And then, of course, navigate, find the best one among, all the different options. Maybe, you came up with some good ideas. Let's put all that into perspective. Let's navigate. And then the last one is activate. Let's take some action on this thing, right? How can I improve and get back, up and going again? So also the other thing is that what the book talk about the 10 saboteurs, right? Starting with the judge and then the 9 other, they call it the accomplice. Why do we have names for all that stuff? Is so that we can recognize them much more, easier, so that again we can get out of that whole mindset, right? And plus we know how to handle them because we have names now, right? We say, aha, that's the name, that's the saboteur I'm dealing with, so I can put my focus on the best ways to mitigate that, right? So yeah, it's the same. It's the same kind of steps apply into different situations, and of course, the more practice we get, sometimes practice may not be the right term because practice sometimes it comes to mind is that I am going into that practice to be better. Sometimes situations just come at you and you have no choice but to
Mm.
handle that, and hopefully you can come out on the positive side. And we want to do the best we can, right, to increase our chances of letting the our sage to kind of handle all this. So,
Yeah, very good.
Yeah, so there's a statement in the book that we can't control or choose much of what happens in work and life. There's a lot that we don't have control over, but we can, however, determine the impact that these events have on us by choosing how we respond. And it says, let your sage do the choosing. And so he also brings up this analogy of a hot stove. So when something catastrophic or something really, really challenging happens in our life, our emotional response is like touching a hot stove, right? Or having our hands sort of placed on a hot stove. So that pain and stress and distress is actually natural. Nowhere in the book does it say that, that we should never have these feelings, but that actually pain is part of life. But here's where PQ comes in. It determines how long we keep our hand on that hot stove. So if we have a major setback or failure or something catastrophic happens in our life, and our hand is on that hot stove, we can use that pain that we feel, that distress, and we can use it as an opportunity to create a. He uses the word gift, and I've honestly, from my perspective, have a little bit of an issue using it as a gift. Like in the book, it says, well, any circumstance could be a gift or opportunity, and sometimes those catastrophic events, like it's really hard to connect the dots between something that is catastrophic and a gift, particularly when you're in it. So I would use maybe I would stay with an opportunity, or just for if the life gives you lemons, make lemonade. And I know that's more of a softening of catastrophe, but it's the only one that comes to mind. So my apologies if it doesn't fit. But we still have our liberty, and I think that's what's important. If we feel like we're at sort of rock bottom, there is this immutable part of us, the sage part of us, that no one can destroy. No one can deny freedom to. It's just our ability to tap into it. That's the sage perspective. It's the saboteurs that pull us away from that. And there is this three gifts technique, or three opportunity technique that we can ask ourselves after we give ourselves a bit of time to sort of bring some empathy into it, use this as a learning experience to notice what's showing up in this experience. Is it my victim? Is it my judgment of everything is bad? What's showing up? And, to do those PQ reps, and then to ask yourself, what can come out of this situation? What are my options? Like, maybe this is an opportunity for me to learn about myself, to reframe, to pivot, to connect more deeply into my values, and then act from that. We don't necessarily own the entirety of our experience. There are times in life that things are not going to go our way, and the resolution or the result might not be the way that we would, from an egoic sense, want it to be. But how we respond and how we show up, and what we do in response to how we show up, I think is what PQ is all about. If we can show up in a way that is feeling more curious and compassionate and empathic than stress, anger, and frustrated, then then we've won.
Yeah. I really like that, Anjanette, where you're going when you were speaking about when there is a setback and trying to turn it into a strength, trying to think and try to come up with three things that are like positive outcomes of this negative experience, right? Because, yes, you've gone through this negative experience, but what are three things that you learned about yourself? What are three things that made you stronger as a result of this setback, right? Both for your business or for yourself or even in your work environment? What are the three things that could potentially help you in the long run? And I think having more of a long run strategy or a long run approach will allow you to get over any shortcome obstacles that you faced. Also, I think also in chapter one of the book Positive Intelligence, it talks about, what do we need to do so that within 3 years we can say that the current crisis was the best thing that could have happened for the company. So maybe you go through a crisis, and you clearly have to pivot or something went wrong. What are some ways that you can start to look above the horizon and course correct so that this problem doesn't happen again, or so that you can build a stronger, more resilient company and or team, or make yourself and your relationships much stronger and better as a result of it. So just think, just think of how you can turn these crises into to one of the better things or one of the best things that could have happened.
Just want to add two more
Hmm.
points around this.
Hmm.
Is one is the Chinese word for crisis.
Hmm.
Not sure whether you heard of it. Is made out of two Chinese characters. One means danger, the other one means opportunity, and
Mm.
together they mean crisis,
Yeah.
which is quite amazing that in one word meaning kind of reminds us, if we that hey, you're in a crisis, but don't worry, there could be an opportunity in there as well. So I kind of like how the Chinese sort of words put together. The other thing is that what you mentioned, Edwin, at the end there just now is the book that we just recorded, Upside of Stress, talk about the same thing, right? We might be in a very stressful situation, but if you look back, say that's the best time that I was able to learn and grow and be better, right? And it's all because of certain stressful situations. So just like what we just talked
Yeah.
about, we could be in a crisis mode now, but hopefully through PQ we're able to get through that and become stronger afterwards.
Yeah, I love that, and thank you for thank you for adding that. I didn't know that. I didn't know that it was danger and opportunity. Thank you so much for adding that. Let's shift gears two last times here. And the first one, and this is a question that we've always asked ourselves whenever we read new material, and that is, what are three takeaways or what are three lessons that you're going to take and apply to your life as a result of reading the book Positive Intelligence? I'd like to start with you, Anjanette. What are sort of your three big takeaways from this material?
So if I can reframe that, if you don't mind,
Hmm.
and sort of like step back into sort of what I'm taking away, because I think it's
Hmm.
sort of it might be three things, but I'm going to talk about it as a sort of a bigger picture.
Hmm.
And if you don't mind, I'm going to put it in context of the time we're recording this.
Hmm.
We are recording this on Easter weekend, 2025, on a Saturday. So we've went through Good Friday and Easter Monday, and the significance of that. So you don't need to be a Christian to perhaps appreciate this sense of resurrection. And so for me, we've been talking throughout about, the devil part. We've been through Lent, where we're spending some time in the wilds and the desert. We meet the devil and really bringing about this idea of choice. So for me with this book and my takeaway is that it's brought this sort of secularized way to allow me to ask myself, who am I being? And I mean that in a not in an egoic sense, like Anjanette here before you in this body, but I mean it in a bigger sense. Like, who am I being? What am I? What are my values? Like, what do I want to connect to? How do I want to show up in this world? And that it's not that there are times that it's not that we are going to always be in the sage perspective and angelic, but we have the opportunity to sort of like resurrect. We have that opportunity to let some parts of that, the saboteur part of us kind of just fall away, and show up in a new way. We have that ability. So when we have the big failures, we had just talked about, the failures or the crises in our life. Sometimes we feel stuck in it, but we have an opportunity there to to renew, to show up new. We have that opportunity, and I think that PQ. What I've got from that PQ is the mechanisms like, oh, oof, I feel burdened right now. I feel like I'm under the weight of a cross. And then I can stay in saboteur, like, oh my gosh, I can go to the victim, oh, poor me, all this weight, why me, why me, and judge the circumstances or situation. Or I can pause, do a PQ wrap, and recognize the deeper meaning of why I am carrying that burden. This is my opportunity to renew. I'm going to carry this burden in a different way because I am rooted to a greater value system. I'm channeling in a bigger energy of the universe or God or whatever it is that you hold dear. And that is going to fuel me. And it changes your experience of carrying that burden, carrying that cross, and going and passing through into feeling and into experiencing that resurrection of self, of both in you and outside of you, right? So I think that this book, in a roundabout way, and thank you for indulging me and going on this journey and trying to weave in different pieces and trying to be respectful that there are many different views and values and ways of seeing things out there. But I think that there is that universal principle that is, I think, very well articulated in this book, Positive Intelligence, is, ultimately, what do we want to challenge? A sage perspective, which is empathetic, which shows mercy and compassion and understanding and wonder and openness? Or do we want to be and channel in judgment and, pride and, that egoic sense of hypervigilance and victimhood? And so, yes, my takeaway is, and I highly recommend this book, is how do we see the opportunity that is faced before us? And how do we take the path of the sage?
Beautiful. Nice. Simon, what would you say are your three takeaways from this
Yeah, I
piece?
think this book is another book that can allow me to know myself better. They talk about the saboteurs and the sage, and I think that is very important, right? To be able to put a name to each of those saboteurs. So I would say the first key takeaway is now I have 10 names to label them. Second would be, now I also know about the five powers of sage. And we talk
Mm,
about that quite a bit, from empathy to exploration to innovation, navigate and activate, right? And how I can make use of them in the different situations that I find myself in. And the last one is kind of to wrap everything up is that having a strong PQ brain can obviously help us to keep calm, not get stuck in a certain emotionally driven mindset, but to take a step back, be calm, assess the situation a little bit more better with the proper information that we can find, so that we can ultimately hopefully help us make a better decision, not a perfect decision, but to make a better decisions. So,
yeah.
so I think those are the three key, takeaways I got, and definitely this is a highly recommended read.
Very good. Very good. Yeah, I think that we all hit on some really good points here. And just to talk about the saboteurs. Of course, your main saboteur is your judge, but then you also have the controller, the stickler, the avoider, the hyperachiever, the pleaser, the victim. There's restless, hyper vigilant, hyper rational, And then and then of course we spoke about the judge. One thing that was helpful for me that I was able to take value from, and hopefully we drop the link in the description here, but there's a test that you can take in order to understand which saboteurs often show up in your life. So there's actually two quizzes you can take. One quiz is to acquire and understand what your PQ score is. And that was something that we all did. And then the second thing that we did was we wanted to see what saboteurs are our three main saboteurs uh, that show up and appear in our lives so that we can recognize it, so that we can start to deal with it, so that we can start to treat it. And I think in this journey of self-discovery and being able to sort of look at what our own saboteurs are, we're then able to diagnose and see those saboteurs in other people and provide coaching and mentorship and provide guidance in helping them as they work through and try to solve those problems. So just having that understanding for me has just been super valuable. My last couple of points here are the fascinated anthropologist, which came up a little bit earlier in this conversation. The fascinated anthropologist says you don't filter any information, you don't use any pre-existing judgment, you don't have a desired outcome. Your only goal is discovery. Your only goal is to discover and to understand and to see the other person's point of view without interrupting, without breaking in the conversation, but just learning and being fascinated and being energized by that discovery process of learning their side of the equation and their point of view. And my last point here is a point that I learned many, many years ago. And it was probably one of the very first things that I learned just in work. And that was to always remain coachable. And always remaining coachable, uh, what that means to me is you're starting to embrace the powers of the sage. Remaining coachable. We've spoke about this, it is listening, having that empathy, exploring, being able to innovate, navigate, and activate to take action, but to always remain coachable, always listen, and always seek the advice of others when it makes sense to do so. And so those are, I would say, are my big three takeaways. Just understanding your saboteurs and also the saboteurs of others, remaining that fascinated anthropologist, and then also leaning into your sage powers and remaining coachable and willing to learn, willing to grow, and willing to explore. And for me, and for all of those reasons, I also agree with Simon and Anjanette, where I believe that this book will make you a much better person, much more competent, and much more capable of dealing and interacting with others. And therefore, I also believe this is a must read just because there's so much value that you can take away from this book. And for that reason, this is a must read. So, as we close this conversation, we hope that you're able to take away something positive from this conversation and use it and employ it in your own lives. So, on behalf of the M3 Collective, Simon, Anjanette, and Edwin, I want to thank you for your time today and thank you for listening to us. And we just wish you a great rest of your day. And we hope that you activate your sage and you eliminate your saboteurs. Take care.
And